to the RE/MAX Real Estate Insight Show. I'm your host, Jeanette Schneider. Does the nice, warm summer weather of late have you dreaming about owning a home on a lake? Well, if so, you're not alone. Many of us dream about those peaceful sunrises or sunsets over the lake, or maybe the barbecues and the entertaining that we can do from a lakefront home. Now, the good news is the Metro Detroit area offers many lakes and communities that allow for a lakefront home purchase. But before you buy a lake property, there are 10 important things you need to be aware of to help you make the right decision and ensure that your lakefront dream home lives up to your expectations. Joining me now is Paulette Wcisel. She is an agent with RE/MAX Encore in Clarkson. Welcome to the show, Paulette.
Thank you.
Well, it's good having you here. So, buying a home on a lake is likely to be a fun and an exciting process for buyers. For many of them, this is their dream home. But buying on the water, I think, really requires buyers to educate themselves about some of the nuances about living on the lake, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, because it's not something many of us have done unless you come from a family that's been on there. There's a lot of new stuff to go on. Now, one of the things within the real estate industry, agents can sometimes choose to specialize or work in certain niches, if you will. In a waterfront or lakefront property can be one of those niches. How important do you think it is for a buyer to work with a realtor, an agent that has experience with waterfront property?
It's very important. Basically because we're familiar with the area, and we know about certain things about buying a lakefront home that you need to know. The aspects of whether you want an all-sports lake or a non-all-sports lake. You need to know about foundations and septic fields and wells.
All sorts of stuff that we're going to talk about today.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, this is a little different than buying a home that I think most of us are more familiar with, like the stereotypical subdivision home.
Right. And they are not.
And they're anything but that.
Right.
So one of the things that you mentioned right out of the gate was all sports versus maybe a non-sports lake. Can you explain what the difference is between those two?
Yeah. On a lake, all-sports lake, you can have gas motors. So you can have the bigger boats, and you can have skidoos. Whereas on a non-all-sports lake, they only allow paddle boards, trolling motors, and electric pontoons.
So clearly, I think this is going to be an important aspect for folks that might be coming to you as buyers that already have a boat. I mean, if they have a boat that's gas-powered, they probably need to be on a lake that allows that. But beyond whether you're a boat owner or not, living on that lake, if it's a gas-powered or all-sports lake, I'm guessing the noise factor can be a little bit more, especially on the weekends when you have everybody out there.
Correct. When you're on an all-sports lake, you're going to hear the jet skis. Safety is an issue more so than on a non-all-sports lake because you've got the bigger boats out there, and you have to be aware. Boater safety is very important on an all-sports lake. Versus on a non-all-sports lake, it's a little more quieter, it's a little more peaceful. Safety is still important, but not as, because they're not going as fast.
No, and you may not have as many people out there that are kind of the weekend warriors. I mean, not that you can't get in trouble on a paddle boat or something else, but I think there is a difference.
Correct. You're not going to have the wave factor either.
Correct. Now, and speaking of safety, I mean, just a case in point, we had the plane that had the accident on the one lake, this week, and it just goes, like you said, to safety and being aware of what can all happen on the water outside of your home.
Right.
So it isn't uncommon for homes on a lake to be part of an association. Now, I think generally speaking, these associations, they're a good thing with good intentions to protect the lake, the surroundings, the homeowners in the area. But that said, these organizations can vary, kind of from group to group. What can you tell us about associations, or what they're sometimes referred to as special assessment districts? What can you give us an overview of that?
Okay, a special assessment district is one where the lake has been assessed, and you go through your township, and they for maintaining weed control and the lake, some lake rules. It's in your taxes.
Okay.
So they're taxed an assessment on their taxes each year for that that special, like, weed control or whatever.
Maintenance and other things that are going to be done.
Yes.
Okay.
As opposed to a association, it's not going through the township. It's drafted up through an attorney, and everybody has to agree on it, and it's strictly voluntary, not mandatory, and everybody pays into a pool. You elect officers, And every year the money is allotted for improvements on the lake, like weed control or what have you.
Okay.
And
So
everybody
in one
votes
case,
on it.
one case it's included in your taxes, so you're not getting out of paying for that.
No.
On the association side, it is a little bit more subjective. You can join, you cannot join. If I'm a buyer, and it's an association type of setup where it's not mandated, it's not going to be taken out of my taxes. Is this something that the seller would disclose? Is it something as a buyer or my agent should be asking about if there's an association involved?
Absolutely. You want to know if there is, and it's your property values. It helps to either have an SAD or a association to keep up your property values, because that's your biggest asset is the lake.
Yeah, it is.
You want to maintain it.
And I'm guessing a lot of folks would want to have a say in that and therefore be a member, of an association.
Absolutely.
Well, we're talking with Paulette Wcisel from RE/MAX Encore about the 10 things you need to know before buying a lake property. When we come back, we're going to be talking about flood zones, seawalls, septic and wells, and more of the things you need to know before buying a lake home. And later, we're going to be talking about what are some of the things you should do before buying a house. Now, any house. This can range from reviewing your credit score, creating a list of what you want in a home, and much more. So stay tuned for more of the RE/MAX Real Estate Insight Show here on 760 WJR. Listening to the RE/MAX Real Estate Insight Show. We're talking about the 10 things you need to know before buying a lake home. Living in Michigan, it's not uncommon for us to dream about having a home on the water, and we're lucky enough to have many lakes in our metro area that make this a possibility. But as a potential buyer, do you know about flood zones, seawalls, and other things that are going to be part of your life if you're living on the water? I'm your host, Jeanette Schneider, and joining me once again to talk about some of the 10 things you need to know before buying a lake home is Paulette Wcisel. She is an agent with RE/MAX Encore in Clarkston. So, Paula, I think I'm going to go to a topic that's probably not nearly as sexy as just lakefront living, but it has to do with wells and septics. But this is an important aspect if they're present. So can you talk about what folks need to know about wells and septics?
Well, your wells and septics should be 50 feet apart, depending on how big your lot is. You want to make sure when you're purchasing a home on well and septic, especially septic, that it's not leaching into the lake. That can cause a big problem. The best solution is to have the well, of course, on the lake side, opposed to the
other side.
Other side,
yeah.
Correct.
Well, you mentioned that it has to be 50 feet apart. You don't want it to be leaching and things of that nature, which to my mind, then I say, well, as a potential buyer, how do I know that? I mean, does the mortgage survey show that? Do I have to get a special inspection done?
Well, if you're buying an already pre-existing home, the homeowner should know that and disclose it. The counties used to have maps of where they were located, but I don't know that they go back certain that far, but that would be something that your agent would want to make sure that you're aware of, and I would definitely have it inspected at the time that you are considering purchasing the home, the well and septic.
Yep, absolutely. So again, just something that if you're more from and I don't mean this in a bad way, like if you're more a traditional subdivision, these may not be issues that you've had to deal with before,
right,
but when you're coming to a lakefront, this is a whole new animal.
Right, and a lot of times they do hook into sewer and municipal water, so it's not so much of an issue as the ones that are farther out in more rural areas where you're going to have well and septic.
Okay. Now, something else that may be at play, and it's at play at some of the areas that you work, which are community wells. Tell us a little bit about that.
A community well is like a larger well for a bigger area. It's not city water like it comes from Detroit or other areas. It's a big well that everybody hooks into, like in a subdivision or an area, and that you still have a water bill.
So you don't get rid of that, is what you're telling me. Okay, it's just a different way of delivering it, if you will. And I want to say that Waterford and Clarkston area have some of this. So I mean, this is within the Metro Detroit area.
Exactly.
Alrighty. So now let's switch gears a little bit and tackle another important issue, and that's going to be flood zones and flood insurance, because these are both going to become very important to prospective buyers. Talk to me a little bit about flood zones first.
I would definitely, if you are purchasing, especially in the downriver area, as you know, there's been a lot of rain and a lot of water, make sure when you're purchasing that you know whether or not you're in a flood zone. There are flood maps that you can get from the county, and it tells you where they are. If you are in a flood zone, you may be paying for flood insurance, and that can be a costly expense over and above your taxes.
Now, okay, so let's follow that train of thought. So let's say that somebody is in a flood zone. So now, is flood insurance then required? Is this something that it's not a choice? You're going to be required to have?
That is a very good possibility that you would be required to get flood insurance if you are in a flood zone.
And you may or may not be able to answer this, but I mean, is flood insurance something that you can get like from, and I'm just going to say Allstate, State Farm, companies that we're familiar with from like homeowners insurance, or is it like a specialty company you go to?
That I am not sure, but I do believe you can speak to your insurance company to find that out. They probably do have flood insurance as well.
Or if not, they know where to point you.
Right.
Okay. And you mentioned it can be expensive. I did a little looking up on this, and one quote that I saw was in Michigan, the average cost of flood insurance is like just a little over $1,000 a year. So it doesn't mean that we're not saying don't buy a lakefront house. We're just saying from a budgeting perspective, this could be a new line item that you now have to be aware and pay every year.
And, when you've got association fees and you've got, which are usually yearly, you're going to have that extra expense for being in a flood area.
And just, again, it's kind of the cost of having the dream home, where you want it.
Exactly. If you love the water and you want to be close by it, yes.
There's some prices to be paid for that. Mm-hmm. So another important aspect to a home on the water is a seawall. I think, a lot of us have heard about them, but talk to us a little bit about the importance and kind of what people need to know about that.
Yeah, if you live on a lake, depending on where your house sits and how close it is to the water, a seawall kind of breaks the water from flooding out your house, depending whether you have a basement or not. So, you could do it with a natural one with rocks. You could do one with steel. You can do a wooden one, but it kind of breaks the water from coming over and flooding your house out. And it's a nice, and it's also aesthetically nice to have a seawall as well and a beach.
So it can kind of do dual purpose there a little bit. But this kind of goes to the point that a lot of homes on a lake, especially I guess depending on where they're at relationship to the water, don't have basements because water can get in there.
Correct.
So a seawall protects your property, in that lower level from water damage, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Well, which kind of raises in my mind another thing. If you're coming from a home that has a basement and you're moving into now a lakefront home that may not have a basement, storage becomes an issue. So you may have to pay for off-site storage you haven't historically done.
Right. Correct.
Alrighty. So we know that getting a home inspection is important when buying any home. And you alluded to the fact that you'd want an inspection done on things. When we're talking seawalls, and we talked a little bit before about septic and other things like that, does it require some other home inspectors to come out, or does one person, is there companies that can handle, lakefront home inspections and these kind of nuances like seawalls and other things that come into play?
When you are considering a lakefront home and purchasing it, yes, you want to do a regular home inspection, but you also want to get an expert in well and septics. And there are people out there that do well and septics. And you might want to get a construction engineer to come out and look at the property as far as seawall and the property where it sits on the lake. That's very important. You want to do your due diligence ahead of time.
Well, you just mentioned something I think that is so critical, the due diligence. Not that buyers don't, but I think sometimes they just kind of rely on, well, I'm just going to go through the process and I just trust that everything's going to work out. But they really have a responsibility. And I think critically so when you're spending the type of money you're going to spend to buy a home on the lake, to really understand the structure and everything else around there to make sure that you know what you're getting into. And I think it's critically important for them to do their due diligence.
Yes. It is important.
So if you're I guess the way we're talking, I kind of envision folks that would be using a lakefront home all year round, but that doesn't always happen. Some folks just do use them seasonally. What advice do you have for the folks that aren't going to be in there all year?
I would definitely winterize your home.
and kind of what does that all entail?
Well, there would be like checking your water lines and putting antifreeze in your toilets and your plumbing, your sinks, turning the heat down to a acceptable level, 55, 60, just so that your plumbing doesn't freeze. Making sure your roof is clear of debris and trees. Because you never know. Our Michigan winters are
They could be a little testy. Yeah,
yes.
They could. I guess maybe the last question here. Typically, you pay a little bit more to live on a lake. Typically the price you're going to pay because they're not making more water. So you typically live there. But the homes on the lake typically retain their value a little bit better, don't they?
Yes, they do. Because of course we don't have as much water as we do land, and everybody wants to live on the lake.
Supply and demand there, yes. Right? Thanks to Paulette Wcisel from RE/MAX Encore for sharing the 10 things buyers should know before buying a home on the lake. We want you to enjoy that dream lake home of yours for years to come, and you need to make sure you're asking the right questions and doing some due diligence. Coming up next, what should you do to prepare to buy any home? One of the first items is finding the right agent, but how do you do that? And what about those moving up or downsizing? How is the process different for them? We'll be right back with more of the RE/MAX Real Estate Insight Show here on 760 WJR.